Now it's time to move on to professional experience and career part. Well, Dr. Soliman, what was your first job and how this job influenced you?
Well, the first, you're actually, I have, although I don't write it in my resume, but I have jobs. I did work for a short time in Libya. It was just field engineering. Was nothing too great about it. It was interesting because it makes you realize you have, if you work in the field, you have to be really tough. Because I was working night shift all night. We're doing water production and testing of water wells. So you you have to work really hard. I did the interesting thing when I went to Stanford. I did something not too different from it, which I thought was even better or maybe better experience. We're drilling for it's called Santa Clara Water Valley, Santa Clara Valley Water District, something like that, and we drilled multiple wells, and I was working with the driller in multiple. We drilled about four wells. So one, if you're familiar with the Stanford, one was in Menlo Park. The area now doesn't look the same. One in Menlo Park, one in Palo Alto, one in Mountain View. Two was in Palo Alto, one by the airport and one by the, I can't remember, yeah, by the airport, one by Duck Pond, I think. And anyway, so we're drilling wells, so we get involved in the drilling, working almost as a geologist, which was very interesting job. And then we went into testing, and I we were two of us from Stanford, and one would take the day shift and one would take the night shift because we had to go from one well to another, measuring water level. Basically, we're doing interference testing, and we knew all the technology and we plot the data and we do. And I took the night shift, and I went through. You go from one well to another, measuring water level, plotting the data, see how the behavior, and you have to do it multiple times. It's was really interesting experience. But but that is not, it was basically a temporary position for that project. They came to Stanford and they wanted a couple of PhD students. But my full-time job with Halliburton was a lot different, and experience there, I have to say, was a fantastic experiences. To me, it was a great company that I was working in research center, but they were sending me also to the field. In petroleum engineering, learning how the field works is very important. So I would go to fracturing treatment. You send me to fracturing treatment. We applied new testing that we wanted to wanted to analyze. We're building new analysis techniques that we ended using this data. And I ended going to fracturing treatments all over, some of them with my technician. And the one thing, people don't realize, although he was a technician, but I learned a lot from him. He was a great technician. That it's interesting that later on I became his boss years later because I became the supervisor over the rock mechanics work. But I still had great respect for him. I learned a lot of things from that person. He's a very very smart guy. Even when we ran research, we would ask him to design equipment for us, and the man was doing great things. So when you work in, especially in the field, you will meet people. getting a PhD does not mean you know everything. There's a lot of things you do not know, and you can't pass a chance to learn from people, whether the, the person did not even have a bachelor's degree, but he was extremely sharp and he knew what he was doing, and I was learning from him. The first trip I went for him, he was the boss. I was the PhD that's supposed to going to become manager there or whatever. But at that instant, he knew what is happening, and I was learning how to connect things together with him. It was a great experience.
Thank you very much for sharing with us your first experience. Well, this is a particularly so important question for me, to be honest. What factors do you consider most often when planning for future?
Says again, or the,
What factors do you consider most often when planning for the future?
eh, you- when I work for a company or university, the things that it's very much like what I mentioned earlier. There's two things. One, you reconcile your interests with your place interests. If I'm not interested in what I'm doing, say at University of Houston, I would not stay a minute. And the reason you stay and you work work becomes fun. You enjoy your work is because you're interested in what you're doing. If I'm not interested, like if I'm working for a Halliburton company and I wanted to work on thermal recovery and they are not interested in thermal recovery, you can't stay. Work becomes real work instead of being something you enjoy. And the other things that one has to always build is not only interest but ethics. You know, I learned that very much from my father. You can't compromise on ethics. That is, and I ended teaching. I was teaching introductory class to students, and part of it I decided to add, since it's introductory class to engineering, we talked about engineering ethics, and we went through, and the ethics applies as a student, applies as an engineer, as a professor, and it's many things. It's not just the money. It is more than just the money. The engineering decision requires a lot of ethics. So I think that's extremely important for every young engineer to realize that. The one more thing that I don't know why I remember that. It's nothing to do with ethics, but you dealing with others. You have part of ethics actually is to give credit to people that did work with you. You can't. I've seen sometimes people try to grab credit from others. You can't do that. And that's absolutely wrong. And for Middle Eastern students, I think one thing that I worked on it, and I hope I'm doing well in it, is when people ask questions, like you ask questions, you have to make sure you listen to the end and make sure you understand what is saying. I've seen many people that try to answer questions before the person finishes asking. And in multiple occasions, I've seen students answering the wrong thing because they did not listen to the end. I've seen that multiple times. Especially, I try to teach my students, say, let person finish asking question before, and not only finish asking, think about it for a few seconds, and so you make sure that at least your answer makes sense. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, it's very perfect answer. It's very true that sometimes people are just asking question and not waiting for like answer, talking. Also, most of the people are waiting for their turn to speak. That's a little bit annoying, I know. Well, if you want to get your answer, you need to just listen.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. Well, before we heard about your confidence and dedication, so right now I just want to ask, is there any mistake that has given that, like I'm talking career mistake, is there any career mistake that has given you the biggest lesson?
I I do not know whether it is not a lesson per se. Everyone makes mistakes, although I tell my students that in my case it's very unlikely, but probably in some cases, depending on faulty information from others. When you one needs, when there is, I'm not going to tell you all the details, but if when there's some issue, you need to go find the right person to give you the information. Otherwise, you end acting on the wrong information. And that's unfortunately some people sometimes you ask them a question, and then instead of saying I do not know or I'm not sure what to tell you, they give you an answer regardless. And I always say that to my students. And if some student, I've taught classes where the students ask me, "What do you think about such and such?" I say, "Well, let me think about it. If if you're not absolutely sure, don't answer." Because I have a couple of situations, but they were not completely technical. But you ask somebody or you ask someone that's supposed to know, and they give you an answer, and you find out the answer was totally wrong, and that is disappointing. I we when University of Houston, especially dealing with the students, I had students coming to me asking me questions about, for example, OPT and all of that. I said, listen, it's not my area. I I used to know, but now I really do not know. You have to ask somebody that knows what he's talking about, because I could mislead you. Not only in things like this, even in technical subjects, and even in technical subjects, if somebody asks me a question that I'm not sure of the answer, then because there is a lot of things that one may not be absolutely positive, you have to think about. One has to think about it, and you don't provide an answer at least unless you have some confidence in and you're saying the right thing. But no, I've always tried in my career to verify what I'm hearing, because I I've realized long time ago that many people they would give an answer that they are not absolutely sure, or they are not even sure that they are right, or they may think they are right, but they actually are not. So I learned that. I tell you, especially when it comes to internet. I remember 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we still had internet at the time. It's not as sophisticated as now. And somebody showed a video, and it was safety video, and it had a nail or a screw going through his sunglasses. And I was puzzled. I know that you need to wear safety glasses when you're mowing, because things can be thrown in rocks and stuff. But that video was obviously fake, obviously fake. And so you can't believe everything somebody puts on internet. So that's lesson I I have known for a long time. But you can see that in real life in other situations.
Thank you very much. So also you talked about it a little bit. I would like to ask again, what job did you do most of your life and what did you like the most about it? Or please,
What did I do? What? Say this again.
what job did you do most of your life?
What job?
Yeah.
I that's an interesting. Most of the time I was involved in research. That's most of my time I was involved in research. Throughout my career, there was some interruption, like some field work or stuff, but the extension was mostly research, thinking of new methods, new techniques, new analysis. Even when you go to the field, like we went to the field, we were running experiments, and I remember running microfrac, running. I don't know whether people know what microfrac, mini frac, the deep fit, analysis of data. Although you go to the field, but there is some research component to it. So that's most of what I have done, including in Halliburton. Although there is a lot of field work, but it is related to some research. In university, it was more research than. I have administrative responsibility because I'm the chairman of the department, but I also have PhD students, and I have projects sponsored by the industry that we run, and we get results, and we do new things. And so that's something personally I always liked. Looking at doing new things. You talked about patents and the papers. That is what I so that was a result of that research with students, with co-workers when I was in Halliburton, and some of it in Stanford. So research was the thing that I did more than anything else. I enjoyed doing research, but because especially when you develop something that gets used in the industry, you don't want to do research where just you write a paper and nobody cares. So that's important. So I always get involved in applied research. And if you work like in a company like Halliburton company, they are interested in research, but research that brings something to the company, brings money, brings revenue, brings prestige. And university is similar way. So that is what I focused most of my career on.
I totally agree with you. The research, I'm very interested in research and it's very interesting to be honest. So now it's also interesting question for me right now, which I'm going to ask you. Was there any quote which motivated you in your early career? And if there is, how did you manage to make this quote to be part of your success?
That's an interesting question, but I I don't think I don't think I have one if unless I think about quotation, and it is a little religious, and I'm not very religious person, just to but but I think the Prophet Mohammed said it. I don't know whether the Prophet or one of his followers, which is seeking science, seeking knowledge anywhere and everywhere, and that what something seeking knowledge even outside is what got me to travel to United States. When you although everybody now would like to do that, and, when you leave your home country and you go to a different country alone, and it is actually tough. It's tougher than it sounds. Uh, Especially 50 years ago. Now you end up seeing friends that may have been there before you. When I arrived in the United States, I did not know anybody, zero. But it didn't bother me. I never felt homesick for a second. I I adapted to the new life very quickly because you're so busy. I arrived in Stanford the day before the meeting with professors for classes. I arrived, I think, a meeting with professors was on Tuesday. I arrived on a Monday. Professor Rahima could not believe that. I had to repeat it to him multiple times. He thought I did not know English. I said yes. Eventually, I had to open my passport to show him that I arrived the day before, then actually the night. I arrived in Palo Alto that morning, and got classes, and we started the classes. So you're busy. There is no time to sit down and say, well, I feel homesick. I never did. I never did. I was so busy and focusing on the task at hand. That is what that was the biggest motivation. You have task at hand. You have to be successful on it. You don't sit down in your room and cry. you have to rise to the occasion. And it was basically seeking knowledge. I remember Professor Remy was in one of the meetings. He saw my plans for classes. He said, "Why this is too many?" He said, "Why don't you take some management class?" I said, "Why?" I said, "I'm going back to Egypt. This is my chance to learn as much as I could here." And guess what? I never went back to Egypt. And he was, I tell that story to my students. I tell them, well, he was actually very wise because I ended staying here because he mentioned that he said, you may stay here and you would need those management classes and economics classes. And all I was taking was math and computer science, actually more operation research classes that they helped me later in my career. It were very good optimization and stuff. So, but he was the right one. I wish I listened to him at the time, but it's too late now.
Now I see why he is the greatest mentor for you.
Yeah, he was a great. He gave an advice considering the student's best interest, and that is really a rare quality, because I'll tell you, when you hear him when he will give us an advice, I knew it now even more than I knew it at the time, or better than I knew it at the time. But he gave advice based on the best interest of the student, obviously the student and the institution, because he was a great chairman. He was a great chairman of the department. He was a great professor. I don't know. It has been a long time. He passed away I think in the 90s. Passed away a long time ago. But he was a great professor. If you read about well testing and how well testing started, he's the one that did all that work. He's a very well-known person.
Thank you very much.